Thanks very much, Yvonne. I really appreciate that. And just thanks very much for having me this morning. It's great to be part of this session. So hopefully what I've got to talk through today will be of interest and use for those of you that are listening live or listening back to the recording. So as Yvonne said, I'm Michelle and I work for the Richmond group of charities. And basically I'm here today to talk about our physical activity work that we have and that we deliver in collaboration with our charity members. So really our aims with the programme are to think about the reducing sort of physical inactivity for people with long-term health conditions and very specifically people with multiple health conditions. And this is something that we've been working on for a while now. So a number of years we've been in partnership with Sport England and another group of partners outside of our Richmond group charities as well. So Mind, MS and Parkinson's UK. I should probably elaborate a little bit more on the Richmond group of charities as well. So we're 13 health and social care charities and our vision is basically to make sure that all people with long-term conditions have better and more equitable access to care and support that they need when they need it, no matter where they live in England. So that's our kind of like raison d'etre, I suppose. Obviously with that kind of approach as a group of charities, you know, it's really important for us to think about how we can support people to live well when they've got long-term conditions and, you know, increasing their physical activity. We know that there are numerous benefits of this. So it's really kind of central, I suppose, to our kind of strategy moving forwards to make sure that we're continuing to support this and basically tackle the challenge of inactivity together with our partners. One of our kind of key priorities, I suppose, that we've realised along the journey is that there's sort of a need to kind of like reframe this issue and reframe sort of physical activity for our audience, and hence the naming of my presentation, because I think it's just become very apparent that some of the kind of traditional approaches and communication methods, I suppose, may not quite be hitting the mark with our target audience. And before I kind of get into all that, I'm just going to set the scene a little bit with what our kind of status quo is. And I'm sorry if people have seen these kind of stats numerous times, but I think it's always worth repeating. So really the point here is just to set out, you know, how large a proportion of the population are affected by long-term conditions. So the NHS England Health Survey from 2018 indicated that 43% of the adult population over 16 have at least one long-standing condition. And we also know that from some research that there's an estimation of about 27.2% of people that have multiple health conditions as well. So this is something that essentially isn't a sort of a niche problem. It's affecting a lot of people. And you add to that the fact that Carers UK indicate that there are about 6.5 million carers as well. You get the sense that there's also a lot of people that are caring for people that have long-term conditions. So, I mean, in terms of those of you that are listening today, it might be that there's, you know, upwards of 50% of people who have a condition themselves, and this is probably feeling quite relevant to. So it's something that we really need to make sure that we're tackling, and particularly because we know that people with health conditions are almost twice as likely to be inactive as those without. And I know that you know, as Jamie mentioned, that previously there were some really positive gains in terms of the number of people that were becoming active, and that included people with health conditions, and that sort of coincided with a lot of the sort of Sport England investment over the last sort of few years. But yeah, COVID-19 has unfortunately kind of scuppered that a bit, and it's still something that really is quite a challenge. I think for our audience specifically, I've mentioned here about the kind of barriers that we know that our audience face, and 66% of people that we speak to through our We Are Undefeatable campaign slight condition barriers. So, you know, this is things like pain and fatigue, and also just thinking about like the unpredictability of living with a condition. You know, one day to the next could look very different. Makes it quite hard to create a habit and a routine around physical activity. So then obviously you've got, you know, other barriers like motivation and confidence, which are really significant when you layer those on top of the condition barriers as well. So that's the kind of like sort of setting the scene for why this is really important for us as a group. It would be remiss of me not to talk about COVID-19. I'm not going to go on about it too much, but I think, you know, it's obvious that it's affected everybody, but very specifically for people living with long-term conditions, it's, you know, there's been a lot of different sort of ways that this has affected and impacted them. So many of them may have been shielding, for example, and it's little wonder really that 57% reported an impact on their mental health, and also, you know, the level of access to health and care that they would have had pre-pandemic has reduced. So 1 in 3 indicated they'd had the same level of care. There's a sort of inevitable knock-on effect of that, really, in that 4 in 10 people indicated that their health had deteriorated as a result, which is really difficult when, you know, you're trying to sort of self-manage a long-term condition and your usual kind of support networks aren't in place. I think it kind of also sort of will definitely have an impact on people's sort of like psychological and emotional sort of well-being. So that's obviously going to have an impact on people's ability to be active. And in particular, I wanted to just draw on the point that the people had seen a decline in strength, and most marked among the 55 plus age group. So 37% of people highlighted that. And I think that there's some really interesting research that's been released recently from PHE, which is looking specifically at deconditioning, which is worth a look, and also the Chartered Society of Physios have done some specific work on strength and strength messaging. So I really recommend that people take a look at those. So essentially, COVID-19 has really compounded what was already a challenging, thorny issue. Our programme, Movement for All, was actually, you know, it predates that. We've been managing this for a number of years with. There's a few different sort of strands to the programme that I'm going to talk you through now. Ultimately, this programme is funded by Sport England through National Lottery funding, so we're really grateful for that, and we're really grateful for the partnership, not just the funding, but the partnership that we have with Sport England to deliver that. So ultimately, what the programme looks like is that it's made up of a number of projects that are actually led by our charity members. And those are basically a mixture of different approaches. So we've got projects that are looking at sort of testing approaches, and then insight work as well. So, for example, Rethink Mental Illness and the Stroke Association both looked at peer support, and they worked really closely, and they kind of compared notes about their different approaches to peer support projects. The Alzheimer's Society, which I think hopefully Jenna will be talking a little bit more about as well today, produced a fantastic dementia-friendly guide for the sport, physical activity and leisure sector, which was really great because it sort of almost sort of had a sort of a multiple condition lens in a way. So if you're making somewhere dementia-friendly, you're kind of making it really friendly and accessible for a wide range of people. The MS Society and British Lung Foundation also delivered a helpline project. They took different approaches and kind of, again, they sort of compared notes, which was really interesting. We had Asthma UK, who worked on a project looking at the barriers for children being active, including the role of parents and coaches, which was fascinating. Diabetes UK also undertook some insight work, and that's available on their website, and I strongly recommend you take a look at that. As well as Breast Cancer Now, they also have just tried to understand more about some of the barriers and the enablers for physical activity for their audience. Age UK also undertook a lot of research. You can see there's a theme here. We're trying to understand more about our audiences and understand what their kind of barriers and enablers are. Age UK's excellent report is also on their website. So again, another one I encourage you to take a look at. And lastly, Versus Arthritis, who took a really strategic approach to physical activity and have really looked at how they can embed physical activity throughout their organisation. They've also undertaken a lot of research, and they've been delivering a lot of really excellent interventions. So some of you may have seen their Let's Move with Leon videos, which is a fantastic example of their work and the support offer. So yeah, that's a not very quick snapshot of all the projects that have been going on as part of the programme. But an important point there is that we've taken a sort of like a shared outcomes and measures approach. So we basically had an evaluation framework to help us to understand more about how those projects all kind of how collectively we can understand more from how they've played out, sort of synthesizing the insights as well. So actually that's something that we'll be delivering in another couple of months, our final kind of evaluation report. But it was really sort of interesting trying to sort of agree with everybody some consistent shared outcomes and measures as part of that process. The other thing that's really central to our work is the community of practice that we run. So that's all of our kind of charity members taking part in that to basically sort of share learning, troubleshoot issues, and just kind of work on shared activities. So it's been fantastic. And ultimately the success of the programme is down to charity members committing to engaging in that regularly, as they have done for the last few years. So that really helps us to drive things forward. We've also got a number of sort of shared influencing aims as well. So thinking about how we can support people to be active, but maybe through others. So a lot of the things that Jamie was talking about the workforce, we're really interested in and engaged and supportive of, for example, the Moving Health Professionals programme, because we know how integral it is for people to be able to get those positive interactions from their healthcare professionals. So that's something that we're kind of looking at a little bit more at the moment, and also just thinking about how the sport and physical activity sector can also help to make sure that their opportunities are as inclusive and accessible as possible. So that's kind of all kind of kicking off at the moment. We have got some other work that we did instigate as a result of COVID that I haven't sort of listed here, which is that we started to work on a physical activity video for people with multiple conditions. So that was very much trying to take a symptom approach to make sure that there was some really accessible content that was available that we could put online, but most importantly that responded to the level of kind of like digital exclusion that we noticed during sort of like the pandemic, that there were a lot of people that weren't being able to access the sort of the plethora of online content that was available. And I think something that moving forwards, being able to be active at home is really incredibly important, because I think, one of the things that's sort of key that we've seen, and I think sort of Jamie mentioned earlier, is physical activity doesn't need to be about going to a structured, physical activity session somewhere. It can just be something that's built into your everyday. It's that movement every day and just prioritizing it, which is really important. So we think sort of trying to help people to find ways to continue to be active at home moving forwards is still really important. So that's something we've been working on. And obviously the charities have also adapted a lot of their offers. So for example, their peer support offers moved online or via telephone. So there's been quite a lot of work to make sure that we're supporting our audience through that kind of really difficult time when we know that people just simply did not have the headspace to be able to go and search out what was going to be right for them. And also just, need to have the reassurance to know that that kind of like activity is sort of almost been rubber stamped by people that really know them as an audience. So lastly on my list, and this is going to take me on to a little bit more detail about some of the messaging work we've been doing. And really what we wanted to do was create some consistent messages for ourselves to talk about physical activity, because we recognised we just needed to change the way we were talking about it so that it was much more relatable for our audience. And in the end, that turned out sort of snowballing into a massive behaviour change campaign called We Are Undefeated, which hopefully many of you will have heard of. And ultimately, it's been really successful. I say that myself. Sorry. I will explain some of the campaign performance measures in a moment to justify that claim. It launched in August 2019 with National Lottery funding, support from Sport England and all of our charity partners involved. And it's really about how we can focus on the real life experiences of people living with often multiple physical and mental health conditions. So they're really at the fore, and they're the messengers essentially for us. And it's just been an incredibly fascinating experience to kind of work on the campaign and just develop the kind of level of insight that we have into our audience's behaviours and attitudes, and really showing, you know, the ups and the downs, and understanding how that really has an effect on people and their ability to be active, that kind of level of unpredictability. I think that, you know, in terms of what the campaign has been able to deliver, we've also worked in partnership with PHE on some resources that are on their campaign resource centre that are aimed at health professionals. So I do recommend you take a look at those. They're really useful. There's things like posters and leaflets and conversation starters that we created. UK Coaching also created some resources aimed at coaches who are coaching people living with health conditions. So that was really helpful adjunct as well to the campaign. We set up a supporters hub, so there's about 850 different supporters on there that can access all sorts of things, like, for example, we've got insight packs, we've got examples of good practice, all sorts of things on there. And Sport England funded 10 local activation areas to help to bring the campaign to life at a local level. So whilst some of the charities have opted to do that through their kind of activation of the campaign, this is people, organisations separately, for example, like local authorities or active partnerships, and they've had some incredible learning. It's been really fascinating being part of that community of practice and seeing all of the insight that's kind of developed and evolved through that process. So, and for our audience, obviously, very importantly, you know, it's about having those kind of diverse case studies. So we've got about 24 case studies now, I think, that, you know, really help to inspire change because they're just so relatable. And there's lots of different assets on the website. So as well as the stories, there's tips for getting active, and particularly COVID-19, we created an active at home leaflet, and we really did a lot of work on our YouTube playlist so that there was a lot of really trusted, safe content that people could go and have a look at and find different ways that they want to be active. So that was another thing that we did. And we also created a tool called 5 and 5, which is 5 little ways to be active in 5 minutes. So we've kind of worked quite hard to make sure that we're providing a lot of really tailored support, including, for example, my Daily Undefeated, which is a kind of a prompt tool. So you know, it's sort of beyond just sharing sort of tips and ideas, it's also trying to encourage people to sort of stay motivated as well. So there's another couple of things that we've been doing. So we also ran a couple of projects which were looking at how to support people virtually and using kind of peer support structures. So our Team Undefeatable and Home Games projects, which you may have also seen in the media as well. Again, they were very much thinking about that kind of COVID-19 response. How do we sort of take this to another level to engage people and understand how we can provide people with support? So yeah, we're really kind of excited about how the campaign has been going, and just to kind of give you a bit of a sense of how all of that has played out into the campaign performance. Ultimately, we know that 56% of the people that we survey through our evaluation say that the campaign's very relatable. And what's really important for us is that it's most relatable to the people who are most impacted by COVID-19. So, you know, we get like 70% of people who've had COVID, for example, you know, who say that it's relatable to them, or people that have been shielding. We get quite a high proportion of people who have been, who've maybe had to, you know, who've just been affected a bit differently, more severely. And also we know that it resonates really well with different kind of groups. So, for example, people from sort of ethnic minorities or low socioeconomic groups as well. So that's something that we're really keen to make sure that we continue to focus in on as part of our kind of support of the sort of tackling inequalities agenda as well. So the other thing to say is that 45% of people say they're inspired to be active by the campaign, which, being a figure under 50%, people may feel like, oh, that's not, you know, that doesn't feel that high. But when you consider what I mentioned earlier about the barriers people have, you know, you've got condition barriers, motivational barriers, confidence barriers. When all of those things are compounded together, that's a really significant disincentive to be active. So feeling like people can be inspired to be active, I think is so important. And that actually 1 in 6 of the people that we speak to have changed their behaviour as a result of the campaign is just something that we're really pleased with. And obviously we want to see continue and grow as much as possible. So I'm conscious of time. So that's just kind of taking you through, you know, what we've been doing to try and think about how we can tackle inactivity and reframe the sort of physical activity messages for our audience. What I wanted to do was just give you a quick recap of what we've learned and how it might be helpful to you. So ultimately, looking to increase activity, is the success looks like a personalised approach, which won't be a surprise to many of you, and social and peer support built in. So key point here is that change isn't sort of linear or consistent, because I've referenced back to the comment I made earlier about unpredictability. It's quite difficult for people to, you know, kind of go on a linear sort of behaviour change journey when they've got quite a lot going on and conditions to manage. So collaboration makes, like, this isn't groundbreaking what I'm about to say, but it's valuable, but it takes a lot of time. But it can't be understated how much time it requires and how much commitment it needs from everybody to be really meaningful. So I just kind of wanted to make that point. I mean, I could talk about that for about 20 minutes just in its own right, but yeah, that was my kind of big takeaways. Project evaluation, we've really found that validated and standard evaluation measures aren't really very well suited to our audience. So that's just something that we're kind of keen to sort of share with others, so that they can kind of have a think about that when they're evaluating projects that are for people with long-term health conditions. And lastly, the communication, as I've kind of already alluded to, relatable language is inclusive and needs to be focused on encouraging movement. It needs to be very broad to really kind of make it accessible to this audience, and I think beyond people with long-term conditions as well. I think people need to see themselves represented to be able to buy into messages. So that's a really critical thing for us that we're really keen to kind of get across. Okay, so just to wrap up, I just wanted to say thank you again for having me on the webinar, and just a couple of things to take away. Please do keep your eyes peeled for our upcoming evaluation that we'll be releasing soon, and also the physical activity video I mentioned, because we'll be launching that very soon. Do sign up to our We Are Undefeatable Supporters Hub, where there's lots of insight packs and assets. We've also got a webinar coming up at the end of this month. So if you sign up to the Supporters Hub, you can sign up to the newsletter to get information about that. And then do take a look at the campaign resources that will be coming up in our next burst in October, November time, and get behind the campaign then. Also just check out all of our charity projects and insight reports that I mentioned earlier, because there's lots of really great stuff that they're doing. That's it from me.